morning again. I was really glad that I could join you this morning. As Kendra explained in her introduction, one of the big chapters in my life that I kind of became famous for was that act of civil disobedience back in 2008, disrupting that oil and gas auction, and then my subsequent time as a political prisoner. That it really became kind of the defining story of my life, and certainly the story that has shaped the course of my life since then. But for me, even within that story, there was really one defining moment, one point in time where it all kind of came together and really made sense to me. And that moment was right at the beginning of my trial on the first day when we were still in the jury selection process. And after the judge and the prosecutor had questioned a lot of the potential jurors, they realized that most of the jury pool, almost all of them, had received a pamphlet before they came in on the first day, out on the street, from the Fully Informed Jurors Association. And it was a pamphlet that didn't say anything about my case, but it talked about the importance of juries as the conscience of the community. And it talked about juries' rights, and specifically about their right and responsibility to use their conscience in exercising their civic duties. And when the judge and the prosecutor found that out, they freaked out. The prosecutor just lost his mind in the way that I hadn't seen him do throughout the whole course of our legal proceedings. And we had to have a meeting inside the judge's chambers with me and my legal team and the prosecution and the judge. And the prosecutor was in there, and he was shaking, he was almost spitting, he was reading from this pamphlet. And he said, "This notion of voting your conscience is out in space." And he actually asked for a mistrial so that we could get rid of the entire jury pool and get a whole new jury pool. And rather than do that, the judge instead pulled each potential juror one at a time into his chambers. And they had this long table. My legal team and I were sitting on one side of the table, the prosecution and their team was sitting on the other side, the judge at the head of the table, and the potential juror, one at a time, sitting at the other end there. And the judge would say, "Now you need to understand, it's not your job to decide what's right or wrong here. You need to disregard what's on that pamphlet, because your job is to listen to what I say the law says and to enforce it even if you think it's morally wrong. Can you do that? Can you follow my instructions even if you think they're morally wrong?" And if they didn't say yes, they weren't on the jury. And I was sitting in the seat closest to the juror. I was just a couple feet away from them. And I watched one person after another say, "Yes, Your Honor, I'll do whatever you ask me to do, even if I think it's morally wrong." And I could tell that they meant it. You know, they were all out of their element. Most of them had never been in that situation before. And they come into this huge, grand courthouse through multiple security screens. They set up an extra metal detector right outside of my courtroom for this trial. So they come in through both of that. They go into this ornate courtroom with all this regalia, and the judge is sitting way up above them with all of his robes and all of his authority, and speaking to them with all of his authority, and they just bought it. They just accepted that it wasn't their job to decide what was right or wrong. And in the face of all that state authority, they let go of their own moral authority and the shared moral authority of their body of citizens deliberating as a jury. And it was at that moment, watching one person after another say, "Yes, I'll do what you tell me to do, even if I think it's morally wrong," that first it was the moment where I knew that I was going to go to prison. But it was also the first moment that I felt like I really understood how some of the great atrocities in history could happen. How something like a Holocaust or a genocide could happen, where this whole body of a citizenry is carrying out the incredibly immoral whims of a person in power. And it made sense to me at that moment that can only happen when the body of the citizenry are letting go of their own moral authority and just accepting that it's not their job to decide what's right or wrong. And as a climate activist, that terrified me. So this was in February of 2011, which was a time in which it was becoming increasingly obvious that we were not going to stop climate change. that we were already committed to a significant amount of disruption, of hardship, of chaos, of insecurity. And the question that a lot of us were beginning to ask at that time, and we're just trying to develop an understanding of, is what that disruption would look like and how people would respond to that insecurity. And history had plenty of dark chapters that could scare us of how people might respond to that. Because when we look at a lot of those great atrocities in histories, it's not just the direct impacts of some sort of insecurity. It's how people responded to it, how they turned against one another, who they scapegoated, what kind of leadership they elevated in the face of that insecurity. You know, at the beginning of this century in Darfur, they had a severe drought. But it wasn't the severe drought that made it a humanitarian crisis. It was the way that they were willing to separate themselves into groups, pit against one another, and scapegoat certain classes. Likewise, in Germany in the 1930s, it wasn't the extreme inflation or the economic distress that causes us to remember that as such a dark chapter in human history. It was the leader that was elected, yes, elected, the leader that they elected, the people that they scapegoated, and the things that they were willing to do to their fellow human beings to try to make their name great again in Germany. And so we have those fearful things even back in 2011, and since then we certainly have more examples of that. That was in February, as I said, and it was right then that the drought in Syria that was exacerbated by climate change was reaching its breaking point. And people there, after 1.5 million farmers were forced off of their land and had to migrate into the cities, that exacerbated the social tensions there, that escalated into a civil war, which over the past few years has produced millions of refugees streaming across Europe and the rest of the world, which has led to a rise in xenophobia, and Islamophobia. And we're seeing that potential to spiral out. And yet, we've also seen how climate disasters and disruptions can turn out in very different ways. It was just less than 2 years after that moment in 2011 that Hurricane Sandy hit New York and its surrounding areas and wreaked havoc on that area. But almost immediately, when that storm hit, the Occupy movement was in every single neighborhood around the New York area. They mobilized, they had people on the ground, and were so well organized that when the Red Cross and FEMA showed up a few days later with truckloads of supplies and said, we don't exactly know where these need to go, the Occupy folks said, well, we know where they need to go. And FEMA and the Red Cross turned over all their supplies and handed them off to Occupy. And Occupy Sandy became actually the largest relief organization in the history of the world, with over 20,000 volunteers responding to that disaster. And not only responding to that disaster of providing the physical relief that people needed, but actually healing some of the social tensions that are often exacerbated in disasters when we think of disaster capitalism and the militarism that floods in after disasters like Katrina. We heard stories after Occupy Sandy, like this one is my favorite, of this kid who had been part of the Occupy movement, had been there at Zuccotti Park, and then was part of Occupy Sandy, and ended up in a neighborhood that was predominantly cops and firefighters. And he was there in this neighborhood shoveling out somebody's basement, just shoveling out all this muck. And while he was down there, the homeowner came in and sort of walked around and just met everybody. And right away, this kid stopped and looked at the homeowner. And he said, do you remember me? And the homeowner said, well, no, should I? And the kid said, yeah, I was in Zuccotti Park, and you were the cop that hit me with your nightstick and beat me up. And the cop was kind of struck there, and he said, well, then what are you doing here? And so then the kid had to explain the kind of world that they were trying to create with Occupy. He had to explain how he saw this as part of his community, how Occupy meant taking responsibility and shared ownership of their community and helping one another out, how their vision was this sort of democratic, mutually supportive society where he would go into a neighborhood full of cops and help shovel out their basement. And they had this moment of connection, and the cop apologized, the kid accepted his apology, and they kept working to shovel out that basement. They kept going. And so we know that more than one response to hardship and insecurity are possible. We know that those disruptions can turn us towards one another with a new spirit of love and cooperation, just as easily as they can turn us against one another in fear and desperation and violence. And neither of those are inevitable. And so I think our task at this time is to figure out how to steer ourselves onto that path where the hardships and the insecurities that we know are coming our way can be a catalyst towards bringing out the best in each other and creating the kind of communities that we want to see. And so I thought back to that moment there in the judge's chambers and those jurors who sat through that whole trial, and I realized that even though they were willing to let go of their moral authority in that situation, surely there must be some sort of situation where they would not give in to that authority, right? Surely there would be some situation where their conscience would be so strong that they would say, no, I have to resist here. Maybe it's for themselves, if it was them who were suffering the impacts, them who was threatened with political imprisonment. Maybe if it was their children, they would say, wait a minute, I can't just go along with this authority. My conscience won't let me do that. Or maybe if it was people in their church, or somebody that they knew closely, somebody in their neighborhood, somebody that they had that kind of relationship with. And in fact, our justice system recognizes that, which is why part of the jury selection process is to find out if any of those potential jurors have any of those kind of relationships with the person who's on trial. If they might be from that person's church, if they might be that person's neighbor, if they might know them, or have some kind of connection which would cause them to have empathy for that defendant. Because our justice system believes that empathy is standing in the way of justice. That in order for justice to function, we need to not have empathy. And I would argue the exact opposite. And in order for us to have justice in our society, that we need more empathy. That we need empathy for all the people that are impacted by our decisions, right? And I think a central question of whether or not we're going to achieve that justice and steer ourselves onto the path that we want to be on is where the boundaries of our empathy lie. Does our empathy and the conscience that is called into action by that empathy, where we can feel what someone else feels, is that empathy just for the people that are right around us? Is it just for our family? Is it maybe just for our neighborhood or the people in our town? Is it just for our church communities or the people who share our ideological beliefs? Is it just for the people in our state or the people in our country? Is it just for the people who are living right now? Or is it more expansive? Can our empathy and the way we feel other people's suffering and the impacts of our actions, can our empathy be extended to people who don't look like us? Can be extended to people who might not have our same citizenship status? Can it be extended to people who don't have the same religion as us, or the people who don't have the same ideological beliefs, or the people who will be coming after us on this planet, the future generations that will want to live here as well? And I think that becomes then the central question of whether or not our conscience is called into action, of whether or not we become forces for justice in the world. That's where our empathy draws those boundaries. We can only create that kind of justice within the realm of our empathy. So I think a central task of our work right now, and more so as we move into the future, is figuring out how we can grow those boundaries of our empathy and the boundaries of empathy for other people in our society. Because we are at a point right now where it's pretty easy to see what kind of ugly things we might be asked to do against our fellow human beings by some authority figure that will soon take power. It's easy to see who's going to be scapegoated, whether that's immigrants or Muslims. It's pretty clear that new classes of people will be criminalized, and that we will be told that our job is not to decide what's right or wrong. Our job is just to carry out the rule of law, even if it demands that we do something inhumane to our fellow human beings, even if it closes down the rights for future generations to live as we have lived. We'll be asked to do that. And when we get to that point of being asked to criminalize our fellow human beings on this planet, it will be important for us to be able to resist. We will need those muscles of resistance that are trained and ready to be able to say, no, I'm not willing to go along with that. I am going to hold on to my moral authority, even in the face of all this state authority that is demanding we go in one direction. I have faith in my own moral authority and in the moral authority that is shared within our communities and the rights and principles that we have developed collectively. And it was that struggle that really pushed me into divinity school while I was in that trial process of realizing that struggle between faith in a state authority or state in moral authority was not just a legal struggle. It didn't just happen in courtrooms. And in fact, by the time it got into courtrooms, it was already decided that was a spiritual struggle of where the true authority lies, whether it lies in our shared morality or whether it lies in a political figure that happens to be in charge of a government at the time. And now that struggle, of course, feels more urgent than ever, of the struggle between honoring a state authority or honoring our moral authority. We need those muscles of resistance right now, but our muscles of resistance are only built on a skeleton of empathy. Those muscles of resistance can only do that work of resisting the harm and the work of creating justice. They can only do that work as far as the skeleton of their empathy can reach. It's the foundation and the leverage which gives those muscles of resistance the power to do their work. And right now we all have to stretch that skeleton of empathy to reach as far as it possibly can. And to get others to do so as well. We might feel like those of us who sit in Unitarian churches have a much greater reach of empathy than a lot of folks in our society. But we as well can reach out towards the far reaches of the earth, towards future generations, and grow our empathy and demonstrate our empathy for them as well. How do we develop that empathy? And as I learned in that trial, it takes more than a pamphlet, right? It takes more than just a pamphlet telling people that they have the right to listen to their own moral authority and to have empathy for the people in front of them. It takes real connection. It takes face-to-face connection. It takes shared experience. It takes people having a story that they can relate to. And to grow our own kind of empathy, it takes getting ourselves into an uncomfortable position a lot of times. This past summer, one of the things that really rattled me in a very deep way was learning the news that Pakistan was digging anticipatory mass graves in anticipation of the heat waves that were coming after the year before they'd been hit with these unprecedented heat waves and they had thousands of bodies with nothing to do it. And so this year they dug anticipatory mass graves. And that struck me as sort of a new chapter in our history of climate change. Being in this point where we know that we're going to need mass graves, that things are that severe. And I saw the pictures that they were digging of this mass grave, of this long trench. And right away it struck me that looks a lot like the trench that Spectra Energy right now is digging through West Roxbury in Boston. And that a lot of my friends were resisting that natural gas pipeline that they were putting through that neighborhood. And that trench looked so similar. And I thought, of course, these things are connected. That if we're at this point where climate change is so progressed that we're in the age of anticipatory mass graves, then that means every new fossil fuel infrastructure project will mean another mass grave somewhere in the world, or some time in the world. And how can we grieve for that as we're resisting this new pipeline going in? And so I worked with a bunch of faith leaders there and a bunch of activists in that area, and we did a big demonstration. We had a big ceremony, sort of a grieving ceremony, a eulogy for the victims of that heat wave and the people who did end up filling that mass grave. And then we took over that trench that was in our own neighborhood, right there in West Roxbury, and we jumped in, and we got into that trench, and we laid down end to end, in the same way the bodies were laid into that trench in Pakistan. So that others who were watching could have that visual experience that this is a mass grave, this is not just a pipeline trench, this is a mass grave, maybe not for us right now, but for someone, somewhere, that we are causing a mass grave. But we also did it so that we could have the experience of seeing what it felt like to be in that mass grave. And I laid there 6 feet underground. And up above me, the workers and the police were mingling around. I laid in that trench for about 2.5 hours. And the police and the workers were mingling about. They would look over the edge and walk past, maybe say a few words. Another one would walk past, look over the edge, say something. They weren't necessarily words of mourning that they were muttering as they walked past. But yet, from my perspective, down below the earth, looking up at these people walking past this open trench, it did feel like they were the mourners for me. And I saw sort of what it must feel like to be in that position, to see people walking past above your grave. It gave me a lot of reflection about my own mortality. It gave me some degree of connection to the folks in Pakistan who are suffering these losses, who needed these mass graves. And those were part of the reasons that I did it. But the thing that I didn't expect when I did it is that when I was laying there, I ended up feeling this strong sense of empathy for these cops and these workers that were my mourners up above. Even though they didn't choose to be in that position, they didn't know that they were in that position as mourners. Just being in that uncomfortable position at their mercy gave me a new sense of connection for a group of people that I haven't always had a lot of empathy for. When I was in prison, I didn't develop a lot of empathy for the guards and the cops that were in that system. And I found that to be a big challenge. And being down in the dirt there, 6 feet under them, gave me a whole new perspective. And I think that is the kind of discomfort that we might have to put ourselves in to create empathy for others and to create the invitation for them to have empathy beyond their current boundaries. Because if there's one thing that I believe about those boundaries of our empathy and our need to grow them, is that we can't grow those boundaries alone. And that means that those other folks out there in the world that we feel like they really need to grow their boundaries of empathy, they can't grow their boundaries of empathy alone either. We have to be willing to grow our boundaries of empathy together, to build that skeleton of empathy on which our muscles of resistance can do their work of building a more just world. I invite all of you to be a part of this work, of growing our boundaries of empathy. I thank you for being here, for being a part of that work.